Welcome back. Now, over the last few days, we've been taking a trip down memory lane and reminding you of the news headlines from 2015. But many of them don't just stay in 2015, of course, so some of them carry over and make their way into 2016. And to give us some insight on what we can expect news-wise is our very own journalist, Aldrin Sampear. Aldrin, a very good morning to you. It's always a pleasure to have you with us.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Let's talk about those stories that were trending now. Recently, in the festive season in December, Abatembu King, Mwelekaya Dalingebo. It almost seems too final for me. He's behind bars now. Where to now?
It's almost unprecedented stuff, never been seen before, that you find a king behind bars, went all the way to the Constitutional Court, and unfortunately his bid there failed as well. But the big question, and I guess heading into 2016 now, is that what happens with traditional courts now? Where do traditional chiefs and kings, what powers do they have when it comes to traditional courts? And as you remember, that the argument with Dalingebo has always been that, listen, it was me dealing with the subjects, and that was the role that I
had the authority.
And I had the authority to do that. However, though, constitutionally speaking, it seems as though there's a clash between the two.
So the tradition, especially in a democratic South Africa, will be coming to the fore, and also the succession debate, because now we know that Azenati is no longer going to be his successor. There's some rumors as to who it might be, but that's also something to look out for.
And the family is divided on that. The entire Batembu clan is divided on that as well. And it will be quite interesting to see what would unfold, who would be the next person in line to take over from. And you see, that's the other thing, that the statement that was even released from the Mtikhaga family is saying that the former king, speaking of Dalingebo as the former king, which means that for them it's final.
Wow.
He's not the king anymore.
Yeah, and talking about people being divided, I think nothing divided South Africa and perhaps even the world as much as the Oscar Pistorius trial. We all had an opinion on what the verdict should have been. Things went topsy-turvy, but it does continue this time. He is still on bail, but the question is for how long?
It is until April. That's when the Constitutional Court will hear his appeal against that against that ruling from the Supreme Court of the Supreme Court of Appeals that said that, listen, Oscar Pistorius is guilty of murder. Their conviction is that the conviction rather of the defense is that that's not the case. They feel that the ruling by Judge Thokozile Masipa should be upheld, that it could be culpable homicide.
So we're waiting to find out sentencing now. How long he's going to spend behind bars?
No. It's going to be different, because remember that the court will still have to make a ruling on whether he's guilty of murder or culpable homicide. And then only after that, what could happen probably is that the court would say, do you know what, let's send it back to the appellate court. Maybe let's send it back to the High Court and let the High Court decide on the ruling, or probably the Constitutional Court could go ahead and get into that frame. But I know that the Constitutional Court judges, they're quite wary of getting into that ground, and especially because this is a criminal matter.
Oh, goodness me. So I'm going to have to brush up on a lot of these stories. So clearly the festive season got me a little bit confused there. But something else that was a little bit confusing is the whole murky underworld of the Rodovan Krejcir saga. That is also continuing there.
That's a movie on its own.
That is a movie. That is a movie.
That
it's
is
almost
a movie
too
on its
good
own.
to be true.
It's just the stuff that's been happening in the Rodovan Krejcir story. And remember that I've only covered it once per se, being in court, and it was so tense, and having all those officers there, and see how many officers escort Rodovan Krejcir, and all the things that have been happening with the case as well. And you can see the frustration in Judge Lamont's face as well. Every time that there's a postponement, there's always something new in the case, and all the other stories connected to it. For instance, remember when his mom was sending through the money,
that he was supposed to escape.
Exactly, and there was the money that the money that was sent to a friend to pay for the lawyers. Now there's no money to pay the lawyers anymore, and he had to change lawyers. Find the other lawyer was busy with it, was helping him, or rather was representing him during the trial, and of course that big escape that was foiled.
Let's also talk about something else that is big, that will probably keep you and I very busy, crisscrossing the length and breadth of the country, the municipal elections coming up.
I was actually thinking about this morning, like, am I ready?
Yeah, listen, I also was saying, oh my goodness, I don't know if I'm ready. Because it takes a toll on journalists.
It is going to be huge.
Yeah.
And we know that the sleepless nights that comes with stories like that, especially the municipal elections, and I guess with the SABC, is that we're going to be everywhere in the country, from the villages to the big cities as well. But then the big story with the municipal elections is that it's probably going to change the political landscape of the country.
Yeah.
You've got 3 metros that the opposition parties are gunning for. You've got the city of Tshwane, you've got Ekurhuleni, you've got the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality that they are looking for, and the ANC is probably making sure that they put in all the mechanisms to make sure that they retain those municipalities. And then the new one that's been thrown into the hat is Buffalo City as well. And then you have small opposition parties like the UDM, for instance. And you ask yourself, will the UDM and smaller parties like COPE, for instance, merge and say, do you know what, let's go into a coalition going into these municipal elections? Probably the DA and the EFF as well.
Yeah, and you put the EFF in the equation, that's like throwing a cat among pigeons as well. So that will definitely make sure that there's never a dull moment. But speaking about politics now and taking a look at political parties, the ANC in itself, and this Saturday they're having the January 8th the statement, but it is happening on the 9th, on the Saturday. But that's also something that we're taking a close look at. The shape of the ANC, the alliance partners there, that ever-evasive Premier League that's been thrown about, etc. But the party itself will be under scrutiny, don't you think?
Definitely. If you listen back to President Jacob Zuma's speech during the ANC, during the KwaZulu-Natal provincial elective conference, that for me was, this is what the president is saying about the state of the alliance, rather the state of the party. And remember that he even came out to defend the ANC and the alliance after a former deputy president, or former president, Kgalema Motlanthe, said that the alliance is dead. And he was so scathing in saying that, listen, if you say that the alliance is dead, it's probably because you were in the leadership at the time and you were part of those that weakened the alliance and weakened the ANC. So we still expect the party to be on the defensive, but we also expect the president to be speaking about issues such as gatekeeping, for instance, which is something huge, which he mentioned during the NGC as well, and basically speaking about the powers of the branches, how much power they have. And I guess heading into this municipal elections, that the powers will be the branches will really be tightened to make sure that they go out in their numbers, door-to-door campaigns, and remain united and make sure that the ANC has a landslide victory.
And of course the pressure is on him as well to remain in his position with the Zuma must fall hashtag, with the endless attempts to impeach him, which have borne no fruit whatsoever. But he's having to really up his ante as well. It
has been a tough, I have to say, it has been a tough year for the president, and especially now after the debacle around the finance minister as well. I wonder, though, if you will say anything towards those lines, and basically explaining that this is what happened, this is the idea that I had, the idea that I had in mind. But I did consult, I did speak to the top 6, because that's the other thing that Jesse Duarte, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the ANC, said that, listen, the president did speak to us about this, but he didn't mention who the person was. But he did say that I have somebody in mind who I think has a BCom, who's a BCom graduate or something like that, and it happened to be Van Rooyen. So yes, the president definitely, and remember, for the other thing coming up is that the Nkandla Constitutional Court case is coming up again. So that's something else that the ANC as well as the president will have to be looking into and be dealing with, Rod.
You touched on the economy. That's also a story that we're going to have to keep a close watch on. And I suppose it can be like an umbrella with a lot of subcategories. The drought is something that we need to look at there. We take a look at the rand having plummeted, joblessness, etc. Just the state of South Africa's economic well-being is also something that I think we'll be focusing on in 2016.
Well, definitely. And remember that I think it was last year that the president made, was it a 2.6% increase, rather adjustment in the economy that they were looking at. And unfortunately, we failed there. And what the president, as well as government, has been explaining over and over again is that, listen, we are not immune to what's happening in Greece, for instance. Yeah. We are not immune to what's happening with the European Council and so forth. What happens there affects us as well, because those are some of our partners. But I guess what we will see this year happening is that there will be more how could I put it, south-to-south relations happening between the country as well as China, especially after the FOCAC summit that happened in Shenzhen, and all the bilateral agreements signed between the country and as well as China. But something else to look out for is the nuclear power stations that will be built. And remember that those tenders will be sent out and invitations will be made for people to come through and make those deals. So, and then of course there will be the BRICS Bank, which will probably take shape this year. All
right, we'll have to leave it there. Aldrin, thank you so much for your insight. So as you've just seen, a lot of content for you to consume throughout the year, and also something that you need to think about as active citizens, because we don't want you to passively just consume the news. Let's get involved. Let's hold our leaders accountable. Let's discuss these issues ourselves as well. So a lot of news items coming up, and these are just a few that we've managed to discuss in about 5-6 minutes. We've only run out of time, but let's take a quick ad break. More in just a moment. Stay with us.